The cruise ship industry has been around for a very long time. The first cruise ship, which wasn't truly a cruise ship, was a mail delivery ship owned by Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company in 1844. The company offered trips from London around the Mediterranean Sea. They expanded their leisure offerings to begin other cruises. The first repurposed vessel to cruise was the SS Ceylon, which could hold up to 100 passengers. The ship was renovated with public spaces such as a dining room, boudoir, smoking room, and a steam-powered fairground organ, and departed from Liverpool in 1881 for a 10-month journey. The first real cruise ship, solely built as a cruise ship, was built by Albert Bollin, who built the ship Prinzessin Victoria Luzem, a 406-foot-tall vessel. The target audience for this ship was from middle-class to upper-class civilians and included a gymnasium, library, social hall, ballroom, and darkroom. The ship launched June of 1900 until December of 1906, where it wrecked near Jamaica. There were no deaths, except the ship, which was unsalvageable. Popularity in cruising died down after Victoria Louise, the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, and World War I, which saw the sinking of Lithuania in 1915. Post-World War II, with the rise of cheap commercial flights, people became interested in cruising again. Ocean liners used for transportation were reused as cruise ships. Many cruise ship companies, now well known, arose in the 60s and 70s, offering affordable ticket prices. The competition drove companies to build bigger and better ships, including amusement parks and movie theaters. While full of fun, the industry has a lot of issues regarding safety and environmental practices. The ocean is full of its own horror stories, and so are its floating islands meant for relaxation and vacation. They're affordable, organized, and great for couples or families. From mysteries, disappearances, and shipwrecks to fires, virus outbreaks, and environmental concerns, the cruise ship industry is not without its dark tales. June of 2005. 26-year-old George Allen Smith and 25-year-old Jennifer Hagel had a beautiful marriage ceremony at Castle Hill Inn in Newport. The two celebrated their marriage by honeymooning on a Mediterranean cruise in Greece, Turkey, and Italy. It was supposed to be a luxurious and relaxing honeymoon as the two both worked hard to maintain their lifestyle, with Jennifer being a schoolteacher and George being a business owner. The two boarded Royal Caribbean International Cruise Line on the ship Brilliance of the Seas, which was headed toward the Greek island of Mykonos. The trip was going well. They sunbathed at the pool, dined in romantic restaurants, and gambled at the casino. Allegedly, they had $14,000 to $50,000 of cash stored away in their cabin from wedding gifts, though it's actually unknown whether it was true or not. On one calm 4th of July night, the clock struck midnight as the Smith couple gambled away at the casino on ship. They encountered three young men, known as the Russians, and a man named John Askin, an American who they had previously met in a taxi before arriving on board. Greg and Zach Rosenberg, Rusty Kaufman, and Jeffrey, a friend of the young men who was not at the casino. This would be the last known photo of George. The young men could see the wealth through the Smiths' clothing and stature. Apparently, the Russians had been reprimanded for their bad behavior on board, drinking and smoking by the main pool, as well as yelling and cursing at security guards. George and Jennifer, unaware of their faulty behavior, opened their friendship to the young men, playing poker into the early morning until the casino closed. Then, they gathered at the StarQuest Disco, drinking and chatting at around 3 a.m. Supposedly, Jennifer was being flirty with American Dominic Matza, who had assumed she was only drunk rather than attempting to be flirtatious. George wasn't happy with the incident and called her out on her behavior, where in response, she left the bar. Supposedly, if Jennifer had made it back to her room, this would no longer be a dark story that ended a life. Jennifer left the bar all alone at 3:30 a.m., as a cleaning man saw her go by. A staff member claimed she was very drunk, going in the wrong direction, and eventually falling to the floor unconscious. George remained at the disco, drinking vodka and a bottle of absinthe he had snuck into the ship. He was intoxicated, and the Russians had to help him back to his cabin. And though the Russians had the same amount of alcohol as George, they were not as impaired. Into the Smith's cabin, George had become concerned seeing Jennifer was not there. He enlisted the four men, the three Russians, and Josh, to search for her, though they returned without Jennifer around 4 a.m. The Russians called it a night and put George to bed, heading back to their own cabin. So far, the story seems quiet and lacks attention to detail. That is until neighbor, American police officer Clete Hyman, was awoken at 4 a.m. to shouting and banging from next door. He recalled hearing a loud thud, like furniture being moved around. After complaints from various passengers, security guards were sent to the room and found nothing suspicious. After putting George to bed, Josh and the Russians claimed they had gone down to Zach and Rusty's room, ordering room service, even having photographed the food with dates and timestamps. However, there is no record of room service orders being delivered. The Russians had previously abused the room service operator and were cut off. The next morning, Jennifer wakes up alone and heads down to the spa for an appointment. She made it back to her room after being woken up in the early morning by a crew member. Around the same time, Jennifer is lounging at the spa. An American teen went out to snap photos on her digital camera. Walking on deck 7 to her cabin, she noticed a red smear on a lifeboat below her. The patterns of the smears included handprints and footprints, a last-ditch effort to hang on for life. She alerted security officers who determined where the fall could have taken place. They found Jennifer at the spa and delivered the heartbreaking news. George has gone missing, and it is presumed he is lost at sea. Turkish police board the ship in the afternoon and take blood samples from the lifeboat and look through the cabin for clues. Bloodstains on the bedsheet were found. They theorized that the men forced George's watch off his wrist. Jennifer, the Russians, and Josh were questioned at the Kusadasi police station. Josh appears suspicious, telling them Jennifer didn't know what happened as she wasn't there. She was with another man. Back home, Jennifer and the Smith family grieved the loss of George, a husband, and a son. George's mother supported Jennifer after her son's death and was by her side through the grieving process, but that support dwindled as she suspected Jennifer had something to hide. Apparently, Jennifer couldn't remember what happened that night, though she did pass the FBI polygraph exams.
Has your client taken an FBI polygraph?
Yes, she took a polygraph administered by a top FBI polygraph expert that flew up from Washington very, very early.
Okay, wait, before I run out of time, did she hire the person who administered the polygraph?
Oh, no.
Another thing to note, on July 6th, an 18-year-old from Georgia returned to her cabin and found her traveling companion shaking and frightened. She claimed she was violated and videotaped. The names she gave were Jeff, Greg, and Rusty. The 4 of them were drinking vodka in a hot tub. She was drunk and accepted the men's aid in walking her back to her room, but instead, they took her to their cabin. The woman turned them in on July 8th, where a meeting was held with the Rosenbergs. They were first off the ship, as well as Josh, who did not partake, but was there in the room. Italy briefly looked into the case, but decided they didn't want anything to do with it. The remainder of the story involves legal battles. In 2006, Jennifer settled George's wrongful death claim for $1,050,000, but their attorney argued this was much less than George earned, reaching a settlement for $1.3 million.
But it's fairly clear, I think, that Jennifer was far more interested in her financial settlement and moving on with her life than my parents. All we want is Royal Caribbean to be held accountable.
The relationship between Jennifer and George's family deteriorated, with ongoing criticism still affecting her. The case remains unsolved, with all involved denying knowledge of George's fate.
Do you think George was murdered?
It's a good question.
It was a cold and stormy September night in 1994. The MS Estonia was on her way to Stockholm, having left from Tallinn. She held 1,054 passengers and crew, weighing 20,300 tons. The seas were rough and the ocean was dark. Around 12 a.m., passengers heard terrible noises from the cargo deck. Some of those passengers were dining, partying at the disco, or deep in sleep. 20 minutes later, the ship began to tilt. Bottles and glasses slid off of tables. A TV set fell onto a couple sitting below it. Furniture began moving and sliding around. That was the start of the screams, which were heard echoing down the halls. After another 10 minutes, water begins pouring into the 6th floor. Passengers were struggling to climb the stairs to get out onto the boat deck. Nobody was helping those who struggled. They stayed behind. A Coke machine fell onto a young girl, but nobody could help. Windows were smashed as a way to escape the water flooding in. Passengers exited the sinking ship, which now fully lay on its side, and wafted in the cold water as they watched the ship quickly become engulfed under sea. The survivors waited in rafts for hours, though not everyone in those rafts survived, as some died of hypothermia. A rescue helicopter surfaced above the survivors, and upon rescue, passengers recalled being filmed when entering the helicopter. Another passenger, out of anger, hit the cameraman in the face. Survivors were taken to Silja Symphony, a Swedish cruise ship. The MS Estonia sank to the bottom of the Baltic Sea, and with that took 917 out of 137 passengers. But why did the ship sink? It was concluded by the JAIC, Joint Accident Investigation Commission, that a bow visor had fallen into the sea due to heavy waves after the locks failed. Large amounts of water pooled into the car deck, causing loss of stability and flooding. Many were skeptical of the report's findings. Plans were made to recover the ship and those lost by government officials, but nothing has come out of it, and the MS Estonia remains in the ocean as a sacred burial ground. Survivors were not satisfied with JAIC's report, though the government was. Survivors claim they heard loud noises as if the ship hit something. Others say the process should have taken hours and not minutes. In 2000, an unauthorized diver claimed they found a hole in the side of the ship, which was believed to be caused by explosives, but the claims were largely dismissed. Some believe it was all a cover-up under secret military operations, or the ship was transferring military equipment. That did turn out to be true, but the ship was not transferring explosives. It was questioned whether a Russian submarine had hit the MS Estonia, as a survivor claimed to have seen a large object in the water early in the incident. It is still a mystery what happened to the ship, though many theories remain in question. The sinking of the MS Estonia and mystery surrounding its case remained frightening. However, more recently in 2023, a loading ramp has been recovered and taken for investigation. Maybe we will have our answers soon. March of 2006, Star Princess sails off the coast of Jamaica with 3,813 passengers aboard, en route to Grand Cayman and Montego Bay. It was a quiet and smooth sailing night in the early morning when around 3 a.m. a crew member smelled what appeared to be something burning on deck 14. However, they couldn't find its source, but very quickly a fire began on balcony on deck 10. Due to strong winds out in the open sea, the fire spread fast along the ship and up to decks 11 and 12. The captain was alerted and sounded the emergency signal, blasting the ship's whistle various times. Passengers evacuated their cabins, exiting smoky hallways, and gathered in groups at their muster stations for roughly 7 hours. Unlike many evacuations, this one was organized and orderly. Lifeboats weren't needed, but were lowered anyway. Eventually, the fire was contained, doused, and the ship continued on to Montego Bay. Allegedly, the fire was caused by a cigarette left behind on a balcony, hot enough to melt the plastic dividers and cause damage to 150 cabins, with smoke damage in 100 more cabins. The heat from the fire was so hot that it shattered balcony doors. One passenger, 72-year-old Richard Liffage, passed away due to smoke inhalation. As the ship reached Montego Bay, passengers were shipped to hotels in Jamaica, where they eventually flew home. The cruise line offered full refunds and reimbursed passengers for out-of-pocket travel expenses. In total, 79 cabins were destroyed, with 218 having fire or smoke damage. Once docked, a report stated that the ship followed and passed fire safety standards, but the codes did not apply for balcony areas. November of 2006, 2,804 passengers aboard the Carnival Liberty cruise, with 1,116 crew members already on board. The ship departs from an Italian port near Rome. Very soon after departing, officials received reports of illnesses. Very quickly, precautionary measures are set in place to contain the unknown illness. The crew carries on, and passengers begin the start of their vacation. By the next morning, 12 passengers and 6 crew members have been isolated. The illness is believed to be the norovirus, a stomach flu, or gastroenteritis. The illness spreads from hand to mouth and can survive on surfaces for days or weeks. The symptoms of this virus include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramping, fever, and headaches. Because not many are sick, Carnival continues on their voyage, believing most of the passengers will have gotten over their virus by the following Sunday. But that didn't happen. Isolation didn't stop the illness from spreading, and in return, spread to 700 passengers. The 16-day voyage turned into a nightmare for many on board. 530 guests and 140 crew members reported similar symptoms during their trip. By the end, some of the passengers were escorted off the ship in wheelchairs by crew members wearing blue gloves to prevent further infection. Passengers claimed to have been brought 7-Up, bottled water, ice, and rice as they remained isolated in their cabins. Some of the stewards were ill, so cabins couldn't be cleaned during the remainder of the voyage. It is said the virus could have been avoided and the spread could have been detained, as 2 passengers reported being sick before the cruise. The cruise ship industry has a poor history of environmental violations, but more specifically, Carnival has amassed a great number of those violations throughout 20 years. Beginning in the year 2000, Princess Cruises paid a $110,000 fine by the Environmental Protection Agency over smokestack emission standards violations. Carnival was also fined $55,000 for violating Alaska's clean air laws that same year. 2 years later, in 2002, Carnival pled guilty to dumping oily water in the ocean. They admitted to falsifying logbooks that are supposed to record all discharges for later review by the U.S. Coast Guard, the Florida newspaper reported, and ordered to pay an $18 million fine. Another 2 years later, in 2004, Holland America was found guilty of dumping sewage in Alaskan waters. They were charged in order to pay out over $2 million for violations to be split between Alaska, the National Forest Foundation, federal government, and the Environmental Compliance Program. Carnival took a break from violating the environment for 7 years until the year 2011. Princess Cruises received a $20,000 fine after its Golden Princess cruise ship released 66,000 gallons of pool water into Alaska Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve. Princess told Cruise Critic that we sincerely regret the accidental discharge of pool water that occurred in 2011, and subsequently we took measures to prevent this from happening again. They may have taken preventative measures from dumping pool water into the ocean, but they didn't prevent measures from dumping other kind of water into the ocean. In 2018, P&O Cruises' Pacific Explorer ship dumped 69,400 pounds of gray water into the Great Barrier Reef. Gray water is wastewater from baths, sinks, washing machines, and other appliances. The cruise line told The Guardian they didn't mean to do that. It was a mistake. That same year, and not surprisingly, Carnival was found dumping food and plastic waste into the ocean, violating its probation from improper waste disposal from 2016. An inspector found Carnival failed to accurately record waste disposals, and they were ordered to pay $20 million. Their biggest fine of $40 million comes from 2016, where they were found illegally releasing oil into the ocean and hiding it. As a response from the U.S. government, Carnival Corporation was placed on a 5-year probation so third-party inspectors could examine the ships. But of course, Carnival didn't take the probation seriously, much like the environment. Year after year of environmental violations resulted in Carnival Cruises being the most toxic, and that number is still climbing. In the depths of the great ocean lie many secrets and mysteries. Within that vast ocean, vessels and ships waft around the surface. Sometimes things go wrong and those ships can be submerged below the waters, or people can cause harm and submerge each other. Those floating islands that are considered to be home for days to weeks, even years, can catch fire, or the cruise lines can cause harm to their own brand, polluting the environment. Either way, the cruise ship industry has many dark tales, but within those, we continue to vacation and cruise while its history is submerged below.